Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Eh, Ricardo, te ves, tienes que salir. Eh, Les doy la bienvenida a todos, tanto los nacionales como los amigos británicos que nos están acompañando esta tarde. Para nosotros, pues una alegría tenerlos a todos ustedes y a los que están llegando todavía en este encuentro que tienen muchas implicaciones para nosotros. La primera es, estamos juntos, estamos en contacto y todavía seguimos en el afán de crear, en el afán de mantener la llama ardiente del teatro, de la cultura, en momentos turbios, tanto internacionalmente con la pandemia, un tema ya bastante tocado, y el tema nuestro venezolano, que ya en verdad un oasis poder hacer este tipo de actividades. Hoy tenemos, bueno, un panel de lujo. Está Steven, que es un amigo de hace mucho tiempo acá con nosotros, con dos panelistas que los presentará luego Aura Marina del British Council, pero yo solamente quería darle la bienvenida a todos, recordarles que el próximo sábado estamos abriendo esto y que van a haber 12 piezas hechas especialmente para este evento. Es para recordarles también una cosa importantísima, que cuando tienen abajo, voy a repetir lo que ya se les dijo, en la línea de abajo, interpretación, los que quieran escuchar en español a los ponentes que hablan inglés. Bueno, nada, es un lugar de encuentro, encantado de poderlos abrazar a todos a través de por lo menos de esta máquina que nos ha hecho mucho bien en medio de tanta distancia y tantas penurias que estamos pasando. Yo sin más quiero pasarle la palabra a Aura Marina para que nos presente a Steven y a los compañeros británicos con quien vamos a compartir ahora. Aura Marina, esto es todo tuyo ahora. ¿Okay?
Gracias.
Me
Gracias,
retiro entonces.
Orlando.
Nos vemos el sábado.
En el nombre del British... Gracias, Orlando. En nombre del British Council les damos a todos la más cordial bienvenida a Casa Imaginaria, un proyecto creativo que hemos venido desarrollando en esta alianza ya de larga data con la Caja de Fósforo, que siempre nos ha acompañado en los proyectos que hemos desarrollado en el área de las artes escénicas en Venezuela, y que involucra la participación de artistas emergentes y consagrados en Venezuela y fuera de Venezuela, en una reflexión sobre el hogar. Un tema que iniciamos, un proyecto que iniciamos antes de la pandemia y cuyo concepto gana una nueva dimensión en estos tiempos. Quería comentar también que el British Council en Venezuela está celebrando 80 años de aniversario, 80 años promoviendo las relaciones culturales en Venezuela, el conocimiento del idioma inglés, la educación, el intercambio con todas las disciplinas artísticas del Reino Unido. Y como todo lo que hacemos, siempre tratamos de brindar oportunidades de capacitación e intercambio. Es así que varios de los artistas que se sumaron a esta iniciativa y han escrito y producido obras para este proyecto, tuvieron la oportunidad en los últimos meses de participar de diversos talleres y recibir mentorías de parte de los artistas británicos que nos acompañan hoy en este conversatorio. Los presento a continuación. Estará con nosotros Amanda Huxtable. Amanda es directora, productora y de teatro, promotora de cambios. Es una artista con sede en Yorkshire y ha disfrutado mucho haciendo teatro como actriz, como escritora, como directora en los últimos 18 años. Y ahora suma a Venezuela en su cartera de intercambios y de organizaciones teatrales con las cuales ha trabajado. Bienvenida, Amanda. Nos acompaña también Jonathan Burroughs. Jonathan es coreógrafo, comenzó su carrera como miembro del Royal Ballet de Londres, ha recibido numerosos premios, se desempeña como profesor en varias universidades del Reino Unido, ha hecho trabajos fabulosos en el campo de la danza con otros artistas de gran renombre, y su trabajo en este proyecto que nos reúne hoy en su relación con los artistas venezolanos, se enfocó en el movimiento, en el performance. Un trabajo de forma transversal con una aproximación interdisciplinaria entre teatro y coreografía. La sesión va a estar moderada por Steven Brett. Steven Brett es el gerente de programas de teatro y danza del British Council en Londres y es el responsable de todo el programa de artes escénicas para América, el Caribe y Europa. Los dejo entonces con estos tres invitados que nos acompañan hoy. Los invito en el transcurso de la conversación, pueden ir escribiendo si tienen alguna pregunta en el chat y con mucho gusto las compartiremos con ellos al final. Bienvenido, Steven, queda en tus manos. Bienvenidos todos.
Thank you hugely, Marina. It's a great joy to be here. And I welcome onto the screen Amanda and Jonathan. I would like to say thank you hugely. I have had the huge privilege and joy of visiting Venezuela previously. A privilege not yet bestowed upon Amanda and Jonathan, but they have engaged fully with artists from Venezuela in the Imagine Home program, and from what I have understood, enjoyed that experience. As our Marina has hinted, these two wonderful artists, multifaceted in many ways with talents and experience that spread right across their fields of practice. It would be churlish of me to try and sum them up in a short time. So I think what I'd like to do, if that's all right, Amanda, is to begin with you, just to maybe self-describe how you would articulate your practice within theatre and direction.
Thank you, Stephen. It's so good to be here. Great to meet you, Jonathan, even through virtual experience. I see a few names that I recognise in the chat. Artists that I worked with directly, so good to see you as well. Self-describe is a really hard thing to do, but it's one thing that's happening in terms of access right now, in terms of artists and guests who are hard of hearing. So I'll start from being really clear on that. I am a Black woman sat in a black space with a purple top, glasses, and a wrap on my head. And as any visual artist will know, there are choices made about that, and some are not choices. My practice has led me to where I am now, which is a digital storyteller. Story is key to me. In any which way anyone wants to tell a story, I'm there.
Thank you, Amanda. I think that's wonderful. And also thank you for reminding that I hadn't also self-described myself. I am a middle-aged white man, currently wearing a cap that is trying to hide my lockdown hair. I have a beard that I like to describe as multicolored, but it's actually probably closer to grey. And I'm in front of an image of Brighton, but specifically Brighton Pier, with the sunset behind, which is where I live in the UK. And with that, Jonathan, can I welcome you onto the screen and to maybe speak a little to all of the facets of your choreography and dancing?
Yeah, well, let me begin by describing myself. I'm a older white man with a bald head, and I'm sitting not very far away from Stephen, just 7 miles or so, but isolated as we all are, or have been. Well, there was something very wonderful for me to be invited into this project for 2 reasons. First of all, I do have a sense that these kind of connections at this distance, so easily found, were not happening before. And I know many people have suffered in all sorts of ways through this pandemic, but there has been this, certainly in my working practice, this one thing which I have found very remarkable, which is that I have been having these meetings with people that I would not have met, would not easily have met. And this particular project was special to me because I don't come from theatre. And I was very nervous to come into it because my practice, Amanda, when you said if anybody wants to tell a story, that's where it begins, and I immediately smiled. And yet, ironically, the work that I make doesn't begin with story, or at least it doesn't begin with overt story. It's perhaps, you could say, to do with how the body in movement and in relationship to other people and places produces a kind of narrative. But sitting in the weeks that I worked with the three artists in this project, I felt like I learned a lot, and for that I was grateful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan. I would just say at this point that I would delight in sitting and speaking to these two wonderful people for a long time, but that's not my place. And we would like to get to questions swiftly. But ahead of that, I wondered, Amanda, if you might talk a little to that digital storytelling, and particularly your collaborators that you've formed Vanitas Arts with, and speak a little to how you arrived there and what that process is currently.
Yes, I will do. You were very kindly sharing. Ora Marina shared my bio earlier and said 18 years. It's somewhat more than that, but thank you very much. I started off my practice as a performer, as an actor. And have come to this point to really tell stories digitally. I say digitally because it reaches the diaspora and the global conversation quickly. Without digital, we wouldn't be doing this now. It's any which way that I can get to people with story. And Jonathan, I'm really up for that conversation about story and narrative. And so Vanitas Arts, our practice is to take care of artists, to take care of writers principally, but everybody around that. So the word is where we start, but not where we finish. If we have a story bursting to tell, which certainly the fantastic artists that I met at Venezuela had, then we take them through that journey to enrich the story, to build the story, to push it further than it could go. It's within any of our practices, really. We don't want to start on the first draft. We don't want to end with the first draft. That's not good enough. It has to get to the question I suppose I always ask of an artist: is this the story you want to tell, or is it the one that you think certain people want to hear? So we provoke and support and push and hold. I would say that in terms of the digital, Vanitas Arts work in theatre, TV and film. And what's really interesting, certainly from the UK's point of view, and I'm sure Jonathan will support me on this, is that we very rarely go into each other's spaces. We seem to like to stay in one space and really live there. So theatre stays in theatre, and and we somehow think dance has nothing to do with that, whereas actually we do. And film will be over there, and TV will be, and that's really not helpful. So we bridge those spaces. We break down those conversations, and language, terminology is another way that people keep people out of spaces. So you don't know the word for this particular tool, or you don't, and it's actually just being really clear, not simplifying it because we're in excellent space, but just explaining clearly that slate, means program, means, whatever that, whatever the list of ideas that you have. So it's just explaining what that is. So once we get that terminology sorted and people feel a bit calmer, we then start to build the world. And that's what Vanitas Arts does. We build worlds.
And speaking of those worlds that you build, I'm conscious in the digital sphere currently that we speak about a lot of different realities. And you've referred specifically to yours as augmented.
Yeah.
Can you just enhance that a little, that concept a little bit for us? Because sometimes the digital can come across to us, you know, in all of our varying forms as two-dimensional. And I know that the augmented shifts that perception.
Yeah, you know, I heard something yesterday, because of course this digital world that we're talking about is moving at pace and moving really fast. And so things are going to change weekly. We're like hourly finding new spaces. So I find myself in the clubhouses, I find myself in digital conversations. And I heard this yesterday from a colleague. Augmented reality is what we've lived with phones. You know, we are not really together. We're on the phone. You know, we've created a space where someone, you know, FaceTime is an augmented reality. It's a digital opportunity to come through to each other. You know, so I think that's kind of not to be afraid of something that we already actually have. We're just building the opportunity to create in a three-dimensional way.
Lovely, thank you, Jonathan. If you don't mind, what I have a, you know, in those separate worlds that we live in, Amanda, my heritage is through the dance world, and so I've known Jonathan for a very long time. And Jonathan, you know, when I ran a small theatre, you know, we hosted a number of performances with you that, and in differing places. But if I might speak personally, what I love and what you articulated so well in the lecture piece that you gave around your working practice is how many layers appear in that and the scores that you work from. And I wonder if it's possible just to articulate kind of somehow how all those differing influences, of which there are many, you know, and specifically, you know, duplicated or amplified with your creative partner, you know, Matteo Fajan, and how they manifest themselves then into these creations that you make.
Yeah, well, there are two qualities to the work, to the performance work, which I suppose would give somebody a picture of what Matteo Fajan and myself do. The first is that we are often now not performing in theatre spaces. We do perform in theatre spaces, we can perform in theatre spaces, but we've become very good at finding places rather than spaces. So if a venue or a festival offers a room, we will always accept it. And I'm very interested in this. Wherever I am is where the performance takes place, to somehow destabilizing the specialness of a theatre space. I say that, and yet I had one of the most remarkable kind of emotional experiences in my working life in September, when after so many months of lockdown and not performing, we managed to get to Berlin, and I walked into a theatre space, and we did 4 performances for small audiences. They were sat at distance from each other, but there was a kind of breathless excitement from us and from the audience that wasn't entirely to do with what we were doing. It was to do with a sudden awareness of how beautifully designed a theatre space is to do the thing that it does, which is a thinking together performer and audience member. We spend a lot of time critiquing the theatre space, and in this moment, there was a sense I probably won't ever be aware of this so strongly again. But nevertheless, Matteo and I, we perform in all sorts of different places. The other quality of our work is that we do use movement, actually a surprising amount. I sometimes think that I'm a kind of fake choreographer because I don't really do dancing, but we did an event for a music festival in Darmstadt last week and happened to see the person that was curating it showed bits of our pieces, and I was quite surprised how vigorous they appeared to be. There was quite a lot of movement, but we also use music, we use film, we use a lot of text, we use slides, we use sound, and so forth. And the last thing to say is that this colleague of mine, Matteo Fargent, we've worked together for 30 years, absolutely closely, sharing everything. And he's a composer. And I have a feeling that what we do and have always done is really closer to music than it is to theatre. And I spend more time playing music now than I do dancing. But I love the fact that the disciplines can bleed into each other. I think that's when we learn, really, which is what you're saying, Amanda, I think.
And also, the context, I think, is important. One of my favorite experiences was Jonathan hosted a salon evening where performance was combined with food and drink, and rather rudimentary kind of theatrical devices of lights, etc., etc. But the atmosphere and the provocation of thought that happened in those often very tight, intimate spaces was gorgeous, I think. And Amanda, is there some sort of experience similar that you'd like to share? I mean, and how does that, in a sense, you know, here we are, I'm going to propose, having not been in the room, but that your experience with the Venezuelan artists was intimate in lots of ways, despite the distance and the context of the digital. I wonder if there's something around the personal that we can talk about in terms of the digital sphere.
For sure. I think to meet the proposal, it was to really deal with the fact that the reality of what we were in, what we were facing, we were trying to connect on Zoom. And we were trying to connect on Zoom without really having full confidence with the internet as it stands. So we knew that, well, for a start, that my mother may interrupt us at any point, that the door may be knocked, that, you know, the bell may go. You know, this is a whole new world. And actually, as Jonathan was suggesting, this gives us opportunity. You know, this last year, I'm sure many of us have reflected, both professionally and personally, on our own lives and craft and just how we do things. And so, as I always do when I meet fellow artists, I first unpacked my bag and let people know where I was coming from. Literally, you know, the British Council had given me the opportunity to be in the room to represent, in some ways, Britain. And there'll be some people in the world who would not have placed me as that representation for all sorts of reasons. And obviously, my journey, there's nothing obvious. My journey of being in Yorkshire, as opposed to London, is a long one. And it's an interesting one, I think. And it then brings another conversation to the table. So when I first met our artist, with a fantastic title, Imagine Home. It's a great, you know, Imagine Home. I let them know that my home had been London, because my accent is from London, but had been mainly in the north of England, further up, a place that has less opportunity to tell the story, but it's getting more and more and more opportunities as we speak, because the UK has decided that maybe we are a bigger nation than we could allowed ourselves to be before. In terms of the artists that I met, Mariana, Jan, and Sarah, we decided to pretend. And so our one-on-ones, we were held by the company, but we spoke one-on-one in the space, because for me, it's important that the artist, it's almost like being in a dance room, and I love, you know, dance is part of my practice, but it was like being on the floor. Show me what you have. Let's go again. Let's check that through. Let's imagine that we're in class. And there are a number of other people, but it's you and me now that I'm dealing with your line, your moment, your core strength, and we'll keep coming back to make it stronger and stronger, and don't worry about everybody else, because I'm going to come back in a moment and deal with this person in that line. So that's how I kind of describe how I worked. It was giving that artist the full attention, and then really asking them, like I said before, that very core question: is this the story you want to tell? Now, it's a very exposing question to ask of anybody. Is this the dance you want to dance? No, it's the one I'm giving you now because it's the one I have. It's like, okay, no, that's that. Let us take that down and start again and really get to the core of the truth. Because whatever you're doing, it must come from, I believe, so that you can present it to your audience in the most powerful way. You know, you must connect to what you're doing and saying and presenting, and know why. What is the purpose? I think I did have a presentation, just a slight one, just to kind of talk through what I was working with my fellow artists. But that's kind of, you know, in a nutshell, our approach within the room was, first of all, to unpack me, then to be brave and unpack the artist, and then hopefully be able to repack the bag, because some people may want to give up and not pack at all. Just go, I'm done. It's too hard.
Well, I'll certainly pack it differently. I think that's a really gorgeous place to move on to one of the questions from the audience, if that's all right. And this one's probably is for both of you, but directed initially to Amanda, and is a good follow-on from what you've just been saying in terms of what story do you want to tell, Amanda? Is that the question says, what vision do you have or of your work in the framework of this delicate world panorama?
It's the diaspora for me. So the vision, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, we're, as artists, we're, you know, I've often had to place the pavement and walk. And it feels like the world, not the world is catching up with me, but that I am now joined with a number of people who are doing the same. We don't know where we're going to go. A vision, we know we don't want, some of us absolutely understand that in terms of climate change, in terms of, you know, economics fairness, you know, in terms of all the things that affect us, you know, we could have a lot of a more fairer world. I think we're all kind of, there's a general agreement on that. And while we reflect on sharing who we are or how we feel or what our purpose is, then as artists, I think it's our kind of duty to mark the moment. But that's my own personal vision, to mark the moment. That's my choice to, you know, the likes of extraordinary artists has gifted us in terms of heritage, and I'd like to be part of that continued journey.
Lovely. And in and of itself, that journey is delicate in some way, shape, or form.
We sure had that last year.
Yeah. Jonathan, do you want to address that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to risk saying something that perhaps people haven't been saying, although I think I'm saying it because I've heard it said recently by a number of artists coming from the hip hop dance community that I've been working with, and that is that it seems to me that where people gather together to dance in all sorts of contexts, including art dance, but also, of course, including social dance, there is the presence of a certain kind of spirit. And that may include the spiritual, it may include the socio-political, but it begins with a form of spirit that I think accumulates when you return again and again to dance with certain people in certain places that hold certain knowledge of what is happening, and you earn your place there. And that's what I'm holding out for, if that makes sense.
Completely. And I wondered if you thought that, just carrying that thought, if you thought that the global spirit had shifted somewhat in this last year.
Yeah, I'd be very reluctant to think in terms of a global spirit, because I think people's self-understandings, physical self-knowledge, reasons for dancing, reasons for wanting to make something are very different, and I don't think we need to universalize things. I think we find that universality when we need to, and in the places where it's appropriate. But I think, why would you want fewer ways to be and to be together and to make together? I more celebrate the idea that in different places that I might be invited or enter in, I would discover something different that would gift me something different.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I didn't mean to flatten out that perception. It was more a case of if there's something kind of that had shifted in all of those spaces rather than as a singular. My apologies for being imprecise about that. Amanda, is there anything you'd like to say to that?
I think it's a great concept. You know, it's one of those kind of utopia, isn't it? Is what connects our world, you know, at the moment is the climate. I think we have never, clearly, historically, at this point in time, we're going through a pandemic, and each country is going through that in a different way. And so that kind of global connection and understanding is something that we, you know, potentially have got better at even through the difficult times, that our awareness of, oh, we're not the same, and this country is dealing with things in a slightly different way, and we're certainly very sharply learned for us who are in the UK, you know, within the European conversation. So I think that, you know, spirit is about well, gosh, what's spirit about? You know, strength and coming back and feeling something and just moving on, and, you know, glow. I've got joy as a choice. You know, I met a number of artists who I felt had lost their artistic spirit last year. They had no access to space, any space, let alone outside, let alone studios or any kind of, you know, for all sorts of reasons. They had less access to work, to make work, to connect with each other. You know, and so the purpose, you know, that is there an artistic spirit? It feels a bit indulgent, doesn't it? I have to be an artist, especially if, you know, that is not paying the, you know, what you need it to pay. But I think I believe there is. I've had this, so in the UK, you know, they have class sizes of 30, primary school age 5 to 11. And so I have a kind of idea of 30 children in a classroom. And I always wonder the amount of children in there who will be artists. You know, is it 5? Is it 10? What kind of country we're in? You know, it could be, in some countries it's 15 children. Half of those children are going to be artists, and that's that. But, you know, mainly it's around 5 or so, if you're lucky, in that class of 30, who are going to continue. And being an artist isn't necessarily just being about the money that you get for that. It's about the choices you make with, you know, how do you get to your art, the visual art, the movement, the tap. You know, you just can't help but make art. It's just what you have to do.
Thank you. And so another question that relates more directly to your experience of working with on Imagine Home. And the question is, how did you manage to explore the faithfulness and honesty of words in the storytelling, considering the language barrier? Did it drive you to explore on some other ways of expression different than playwriting?
We were very, very fortunate to have Felix, who's on the call today, who's an extraordinary gift of being able to communicate. And I had confidence he communicated as I had said. And who he was communicating with, so helping me with the fellow artists. Now, there was obviously the slight delay, but there was a particular artist, Mariana, who eyes, expression. It's my job as a director to be observant, to be meticulous in my observation. So it's not about narrative, it's about what the person, you can tell the person's body language, you can tell what they're about, what they're going to be, and so and Mariana is a clearly a gifted artist in her own right, as well as a director and a producer. And so her expression, her shoulders told me everything I needed to know about how she felt about her script. And then we had that. So in terms of language and text, that first initial person to person, that wasn't an issue. I would say, and I might be, forgive me if it feels a little indulgent, but I'm going to say this. I think coming into the space as a British director, you have to get Shakespeare out of the room. Shakespeare takes over the whole space. It's like you bring him in the room and everyone thinks he's the one. Oh, this is the only way of being. This is the only way of addressing story. Now, Shakespeare is extraordinary, and I'm so glad he arrived and told us and gifted us the language that he gave us, or a few people gave us, because I'm sure he had a bag of people helping him write all those lovely things with a good old, drink. And so you get him out of the room, and you really invite people to center their story, their language, their way of being, and honoring that to the rhythm of your story. We shift the world map a little, and that's something that it's really important for me for artists.
Lovely. Jonathan, I guess for you, you've spoken to it already as being a dance maker working in the theatrical realm. How has that communication been for you?
Halfway through working, a memory came back to me, which somehow had slipped away, and it was of a friend who had been the director of a theatre when I was a teenager, and meeting him some years later, and he pulled out of his bag a photocopy of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. And it was the notes that Beckett had made over his own text while he had been directing a production of Waiting for Godot in this man's theatre. And he handed me this sheaf of papers, and I sat down and spent half an hour reading. And the only notes that Beckett had made were about the sound that was happening from the actors and within the space. That was all. And so that interested me. When that memory came back to me, it encouraged me to suggest that the playwrights and directors take the risk to write down those kind of tiny details. So not to assume them either as an improvisation or as an accident of the filming because the work was going to be filmed. But what would happen if you tried to understand what was happening through the filter of, for instance, movement or sound, and made note of it? not to follow, that you would have to memorize it, but as a way to heighten your sense of what was happening. So that was one way that I tried to approach it.
Thank you. It appears that I'm receiving the questions through the chat, and I misinterpreted that last one, which was apparently related a little bit more to ways of expression rather than language and translation. So a linguistic context as opposed to translation itself. Does that change your answer? Maybe would either of you like to have anything to say?
I'm going to invite Jonathan to go for that one. I loved his last answer in terms of sound.
Well, I should point out that the three short plays that I was working with, they had arrived at a instruction from a previous mentor to not use text at all. So we were meeting in a place of physical presence, and in a way that was a gift. Given the distance and not knowing each other and not having the side chat that you would have over coffee between, more focused or intense conversations. But I mean, also, there is a strange synesthesia that happens when you watch theatre in another language, whereby in many ways you do understand exactly what is happening. And I've had that proven to myself, because Tadeusz Kantor's Dead Class, the extraordinary Polish director, which I saw in the late 1970s more than once in Polish, I finally saw with a simultaneous translation online. And I realized that I had really grasped everything as a 17-year-old, even in another language. So there are all sorts of levels by which we read performance and by which we read theatre. And I think language is only one of them. Of course, it's central, but it is only one of them. Would you agree with that, Amanda?
Absolutely, definitely with you on that one. I have to say, in terms of linguistics and language, I kind of frighten writers by saying I really love silence. I think silence is the best tool. So it's like, space. Give me some space. Also, give a thought to the artist who has to learn the lines. But we don't tell. We are text heavy, I think, in the UK for sure. When kind of telling, and I think the opportunity to, certainly for us, in our space, I invited artists to think about anything else but text. So the text had to earn its space. It had to earn its place. It's like it can't be there otherwise. And to visualize your work, absolutely. Because that's where we're getting to now anyway. We're very, very, we're able to do that, to tell the story in all those different senses.
Thank you. I'm aware that, Jonathan, we need to finish sometimes soon. Some of the audience are asking questions in English already. I'm going to paraphrase one that was around social practice. And it was a question about how difficult it is to find theatre spaces or unconventional spaces or spaces that are kind of available through a city council, and how to encourage organizations to open those out to artists whose work is centered around a social practice.
Well, Jonathan touched on that, didn't he? And I know he has to leave soon, so I'll leave him to answer that again.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, it's a difficult one across the world, isn't it? And I think we're encouraging, what is the purpose of space and shared space and multiple spaces? And Jonathan already said, didn't he, that it's not just about theatre spaces. I think it's very interesting when we have to be in institutions in order to validate our work. When the work is actually, it's about, you need a safe, clean space. You know, that's always a useful, you know, especially the floor, you know. And so thinking differently is, I think thinking differently, I think is a succinct way I'm going to answer that, just to think differently about where you can make work.
I think the question is, how do you encourage people to invite you into that space? So what is the conversation to be had with someone who runs a parish hall or a council program or a theatre as to get that social practice into their space?
Yeah, with the last 5 minutes, it's a hard one to answer, but with my producer hat on, it's been very clear about what your purpose will be. What you need is that, so the hour that you would take, the people that will be there, it's like anything. You're going into an invited space, and you're going to leave it as you find it. It's being the good guest. I don't know. I can't answer that in the time that we have. So that's,
I know. I'm sorry. It's a terrible launch on you with 3 minutes to spare. Jonathan, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, I mean, as you know, Stephen, I've for the last 20 years, I've only ever worked in my living room, and this was to kind of circumnavigate difficulties that I had with the processes that I was having to put my practice through in order to get other kinds of spaces. But those other spaces are essential to me. And I have nothing but admiration for people that find and hold extraordinary spaces, as indeed you did in Brighton, Stephen. This was my experience is invited by you to perform in that funny room above a pub were amongst the richest that I've had. And people appear to continue to be able to find spaces and to find ways to fund them. I've been working this last 2 weeks with a hip hop artist called Muti, and he's just opened a space. I was looking at my phone because I forgot. Let me tell you the name of it. It's in Tottenham. It's in Edmonton, actually. Village 101. It's a large industrial space, and he's financing it by renting it out to companies making videos and advertising. And I'm just astonished. I think it's, and at the same time, he makes his own work. So people find ways, and yeah, but I love what you say, Amanda, that you, wherever you enter in or are invited in, you enter with respect. And that's at the heart of it. For an audience member too.
So there is another one, but I think I'd just like to maybe just leave it rather than answer it. And it is about whether or not, the question is whether or not we feel that the pandemic and the way that the pandemic has influenced our work will enclose us more in our cultural context or enable us through these digital realms to expand and find new worlds. And I think it's a really interesting question, but I'm going to save you and ask you not to answer that just because we only have 3 minutes left. But it's a good one to leave in the space. Thank you, Jonathan, Amanda. We've come to the end, and just to finish up, I'd just like to invite the very wonderful Diana Volpe into the space. Diana, thank you.
Thank you. Gracias, Steve. Gracias, Jonathan. Gracias, Amanda. Quiero invitarlos a todos a que nos acompañen en este festival. Pueden encontrar toda la programación en la página web de la Caja de Fósforos. Ahí el festival está dividido en 3 secciones. Empezamos con construcciones, que son 3 cortos de artistas invitados, artistas de la diáspora venezolana. Tendremos luego Inmóvil, que es simplemente una galería de retratos hablados de gente de cualquier lugar que habla sobre la casa. Y Paraderos, que son 8 cortos realizados por los jóvenes que tomaron talleres con estos maravillosos artistas ingleses y venezolanos. Así que síganos en la página de lacajadefósforos.com, y los quiero dejar con 2 frases maravillosas que escuché. Jonathan: "The breathless excitement of creation." Thank you. Continuaremos con eso. Y Amanda, we can't help but make art. Indeed, let's go on. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Amanda and Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Always a joy. Thank you very much, guys. Take care, everybody, please.
Bye bye.
Muchas gracias.
Chao, gracias a todos.